Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I'm going to talk about what do you do when you finish your PhD? So what do you do after you've actually completed that particular degree that you've been sort of hoping to get for a long time and you eventually get that particular degree? So if you don't know me, I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out during graduate school that I wanted to give back. And first of all, I created this sort of sharing economy proofreading platform to get feedback on your writing. And then I started doing these YouTube videos to get the word out. I think it's actually really kind of a cool thing. So once you finished your PhD, what should you do after that? So this is an obvious time, or just before you're completing your PhD, it's an obvious time to sort of take a step back and think about whether you want to go into academia and sort of push things forward. So if you are doing the normal route like the rest of us, or like a lot of people, not everybody does this, right? So probably less than the majority will go into academia, but there's a substantial number of people that will do this, and you kind of go into becoming either a postdoc or get a assistant professor position if you're fortunate. But not everybody is going to do that kind of stuff, and you want to sort of consider and think about whether you actually want to do that going forward, right? So for me, I pushed it forward. I actually thought about it a lot, and I sort of weighed the consequences, right? So I'm a big believer in sort of going through and going on an Excel spreadsheet and sort of rank ordering different life choices. And you can go through and make sense of that by doing it. So just putting the different alternatives on there. It's advice that was given to me, and I did it, and it worked out really well for me. So it made me sort of rationally think about different decisions going forward. And then now I'm a professor at a business school, which is really cool. But, if you don't want to choose this route and you're sort of seriously thinking about this, there's lots of different things that you can consider going forward, right? And I have lots of friends doing sort of various things that they've pursued, or, different colleagues and stuff like that have gone in different directions, right? So some of them went into kind of research, sort of think tanky kind of stuff, and they're doing research at a think tank. Some people are doing stuff at not-for-profits. And, some people have done sort of tech commercialization. So if you don't know this, at a university, a lot of people will do, or some people will do tech commercialization, where you generally would require some sort of PhD, and you're kind of a liaison, sort of a middle person between the academics and as well as people that are doing sort of commercialization and businessy kind of stuff at your college or university. And that's a really viable way. There's lots of different sort of administrative ways that you can do the academic thing as well and do administrative stuff. And there's just so many different choices that you can choose. Some people have gone into consulting and gone into management consulting, for example. It's a very viable career, particularly if you're thinking about that. It's sometimes could be lucrative if you do that route. You can also go into working at a government. So before I did this, I worked at the Ministry of Health in Ontario, which is a large government sort of healthcare agency. It's the largest one in the world, actually, because it was still publicly, or maybe it was in North America, but largest one in sort of a large area in terms of how much revenue that they were requiring to sort of process. And that is a viable thing and they look for people that have PhDs because they need to understand sort of quantitative analysis and things like that. So there is viable careers outside of academia before you do this. But there's a couple of things that you should consider before you make these choices going forward. And the one thing that you should do is you should think about why you actually did a PhD in the first place. Now, if you can answer this will usually give you a good insight, because generally what ends up happening during the PhD is you kind of get demotivated, or really kind of go in a different direction, or you just feel like uncomfortable with what you're doing just because the PhD is really tough. And so if you can think about what you wanted to do in the first place before you actually started the PhD, that's going to be very, very helpful for you going forward. It's going to help you make that decision going forward. The second thing that you should consider is think about your supervisors. And with the relationship that you've formed with your PhD supervisors, you have to be very careful And the reason is people they invest a lot of their own time in you, and that you should either early on communicate what your sort of career goals are and be very crystal clear with those, or at certain moments just be very careful with what you're doing and communicating. And this was kind of a lesson that I personally learned, and I was always yeah, you have to be sort of self-interested, obviously, but then you have to be very considerate of thinking about your supervisors and advisors, however you want to sort of call it. You have to be very careful and think about what they have done. They've invested a lot of time into you. And so you don't want to take that relationship, not seriously. You want to be very careful in what you're communicating with them in terms of where you're going to go. Now, a lot of people, so personally, I wouldn't care what you sort of direction you choose, as long as you're being upfront and honest with the direction that you're choosing. And so you just have to be, honest all the way through. And sometimes you just don't know what you want to do, but just be honest with that, right? And just push that forward. And sometimes your advisors, if they're doing their good job and they're just honest people, that they're going to be helpful in whatever you choose. And so one of my supervisors told me that I have to crap or get off the pot. I don't know if you've ever heard of that saying. We grew up in I grew up in Northern Ontario, so it's a saying of like, okay, it goes back to the days of when people were going out to an outhouse and they had to, get things going. But you have to decide whether you want to sort of make a decision, right? You have to make a decision at that moment. Once you make that decision, just make it and then carry on going forward. And I think most people would be okay with that. You also should think about whether a third thing to consider is if you're motivated for money and sort of monetary reasons, which is totally perfect. And I would highly, highly recommend that you should be motivated by money, because it's your life. And if you're going to have to do this for 35 years, you want to make sure that you're going to be making money at the end of it, right? It's kind of a silly decision to sort of discount that, or if anybody's discounting that, I'm going to call BS, because you need to make a life and a living going forward with that. But what I would consider and sort of point you to think about, and I tell my own students this kind of stuff, is make sure that you have a very concrete idea of what the financial returns are in each direction. So the one thing with academia, it's very explicit how much you're going to make, and that's really nice. Or you can get an explicit number by just asking around. Now, some places and some sort of career trajectories are not going to be explicit. And so it makes decision-making really difficult. And so it's up to you, and I would highly recommend for you to get these explicit numbers somehow and dig deep into that. So if you want to go into management consulting, there's huge variance in terms of how much you're going to make. If you're doing it on your own, you're probably not going to make a lot of money for a long time before you actually start making money. If you go work for a management consulting firm like Bain & Co. or McKinsey, then yeah, you probably might get some numbers. And so go and look to see how much you're going to make. Or working for the government, make sure that you have a good understanding of what it means to go in either direction before you go in that direction, right? So if it's working for the government and you're going to make half as much as you are in just going into, into industry or academia or whatever it is that you're choosing, then really think about that. That's an important decision for you to do, but you have to have those concrete numbers before you can move forward on those decisions, right? And so once you decide or think about, I might go this direction, go get those numbers and just be very clear on what those numbers are before you're going and make that decision. It's going to matter so much for your life, right? So why not put the effort in up front to get those numbers? And the last thing I want to point out is, if you are choosing a career direction to escape the difficulties that you have during your PhD, or that you find doing the particular degree difficult, it's probably not going to change in any direction that you choose, right? It's all going to be difficult no matter what you choose to do. And so you have to be very considerate about that. Now, some things are going to be, some characteristics of the job that you're thinking about are different, and they are helpful. So one thing is like loneliness and depression and stuff like that during a PhD that you do get. And most people are going to get that. And the one nice thing when you're working in industry is, unless you're working for like a startup or something like that, you're going to experience the same sort of stuff. But in an industry, a large corporation, you're going to have lots of people around, and they do work on sort of the human resources and social capital and things like that to make sure that you're actually having fun and it's a wonderful experience of wherever you're working on. So they're going to have parties and all that kind of stuff and build community, and they're really focusing on that kind of stuff. Whereas academia, we don't do that a good enough job of doing that. Some people do, and that's great, but in general, there's a lot of loneliness that is associated with it, right? So if you have that difficulty there, then going to a different kind of job might be very helpful in terms of what you're thinking about. But then if you still experience, if you're experiencing depression in one sort of area, doesn't mean you're not going to experience depression in another area, right? So that's the kind of things that you have to think about going forward. Is you have to be very considerate, is like the things who you are, and this is kind of a life lesson as I get older, it's who you are, right? So it doesn't change as you try to sort of move up or move in different directions and stuff like that to find who you are. You are who you are, and once you sort of embrace that, then you can sort of exploit that a little bit more going forward, right? And it's not going to change depending on which direction you go. So hopefully this was really helpful for you in making up your decision after you've completed your PhD or getting near towards the end of your doctorate. And if it's helpful, give me a thumbs up. I do appreciate it. And do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Trying to be as helpful as I possibly can. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.